fucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news. Ow!
I've done it the hard way, so why should I go do a defense? But I tell you what, I was really impressed with Camara. Like, I'd like to have a fight with her. I sat next to Eddie, and Eddie said about me and Camara would be a great fight.
That soundbite comes to us by way of Shadow Boxer UK, the always eloquent Jackie Price, who conducted this interview with reigning unified 140-pound champion Chantel Camara ahead of what is to be her undisputed title fight with the only other unified champion at this weight, Rhode Island's own Reis. The idea is if Chantel wins that fight, what happens after that? That seems to have been the topic of discussion, the topic of conversation. If Chantel wins that fight against Reis and becomes this division's undisputed champion, what comes after that? It's a hypothetical scenario because we ain't got a fight date. Here at year's end in 2021, we don't yet know when Chantel Camara and Reis are going to be locking horns next year. And we don't have the outcome of that match. I know that many of you out there are favoring Chantel Camara to win the fight because she's all in her prime, because many of you aren't even convinced that Reis beat Jessica Camara. I've seen those comments. I've seen those people. I acknowledge that there are people out there that feel that way. Though it's besides the point, because here and now, we don't know when they're going to be fighting, and we don't have the outcome of that match. So if we're going to entertain a Camara versus Camara, we're essentially hypothesizing is what we're doing. You have to envision a world where Chantel Camara may have already beaten Reis and has become this division's undisputed champion. You have to envision a world where maybe a Katie Taylor fight isn't there for her at that time, and maybe a Jessica McCaskill fight, maybe that's not there for her either, even though I think that's a genuine possibility for the winner of Reis versus Camara. Hell, I think that's a possibility for the loser, because Jessica signed a multi-fight deal with Matchroom, and she needs opponents. Opponents not exclusive to Katie Taylor, just Katie Taylor, who is busy for the time being. She's busy right now. She's supposed to be meeting up with Amandia Serrano next year to have their showdown. Those things in mind, and that being said, the winner of Camara versus Reis, the loser of Camara versus Reis, the both of them are genuine possibilities for a Jessica McCaskill fight, one division up at welterweight. It's Camara versus Camara that we're supposed to be talking about, though. Eddie Hearn likes that fight for Chantel, and Chantel likes that fight for herself. What do I think about that fight? I think that Jessica Camara exceeded my expectations. I didn't think she'd be as durable as she was on the receiving end of some hard shots from Reis, and she delivered some hard shots as well. Kaylee, though, I knew Kaylee would be able to take the shots. I knew Kaylee was durable. Kaylee's fought bigger girls than Jessica. Kaylee's never been stopped. Though when it comes to Camara versus Camara, I envision a very technical fight that's going to come down to sharpshooting and accuracy. I don't imagine it would be an all-out war, brawl, the way that Camara versus McGee was. Don't get me wrong, I think it would be entertaining, but I don't imagine that the pace of the fight and the fight's aesthetic would be akin to what we saw in Camara versus McGee, or Camara versus Reis for that matter. Entertaining, yes, but I think it would be a thinking fight. I'd give Chantel the edge to win it. Chantel, like Jessica, can box a bit, but Chantel can punch. That's the difference.
She's got a real mean streak.
I very much like the idea of Chantel Camara versus Jessica Camara after what could be a Kaylee Reis unification match. If Chantel wins the fight, I do like the idea of Camara versus Camara. The division has structure now. Champions and challengers, recognizable names, recognizable faces. This is what was missing before in the sport of women's boxing. Fighters fighting on major platforms, making statements, making names for themselves, and having that profile to where the fight fan will know a good fight from a not-so-good fight. A good fighter from a great fighter, and a great fighter from a not-so-great fighter. This is what's been missing in the past. I very much look forward to the future of the 140-pound division in the coming year of 2022.
So it's going to be a very busy March.
Yes, it will be. It will be, yeah.
Could one of those shows in March be headlined by Tyson Fury in the UK?
Yeah, I'm pretty confident that one of those shows will feature him. He won't be defending his WBC title. There's a problem there, not of our making, or his making, I should say. WBC and Dillian Whyte are in arbitration. That hearing's not set to be heard until March. We can't negotiate. It's all very well, Eddie Hearnby's nonsense about negotiating. How can you negotiate when when the WBC haven't said what the splits are? So in his mind, he thinks he's getting 45%. In our mind, it's 20%, based upon the purses, his previous purses that were lodged under WBC regulations. And they won't determine what the percentages are until the arbitration. So until that happens, we can't negotiate. And that doesn't mean the fight's going to take place in April. We've got to negotiate, book a venue, depending on who wins the, if we can negotiate something amicably, or who wins the purse bid. And that won't go until June. So Tyson will fight, but not for the WBC title.
Straight from the horse's mouth, the fish, I should say, as Old Fish Eyes Frank Warren states quite clearly, Dillian Whyte is not next. In spite of Tyson Fury's own words that he'd fight Deontay Wilder, then Dillian Whyte, in that succession. In spite of Dillian Whyte being Tyson Fury's mandatory challenger.
Dillian isn't next, and I'm not surprised.
I don't think many of you here on the channel are surprised. Those of you that follow Ring IQ Boxing Talk here on YouTube, where I've been saying on repeat, in spite of the situation and how it looks on the surface, I'm not convinced that the fight happens. Something's going to go wrong. According to Frank Warren, because of the arbitration, the WBC themselves won't determine the split for the fighters. But that's not saying that the aforementioned parties, Team Whyte, Team Fury, can't determine a split themselves. The real issue is that Frank and Bob don't want to pay Dillian the way he wants to get paid.
I heard something about them wanting to offer him 80-20.
And you don't make an offer like that for a fight like this in good faith. You just don't. You don't make an offer like that with any real intention of getting the fight over the line. Frank Warren knows that, and so does Bob Arum. You don't offer Dillian Whyte, who's already a box office draw in his own respect in the United Kingdom. You don't offer a guy like that an 80-20 split and expect the fight to get made.
You're going to hear a lot of takes about this situation, and that's mine.
If you guys out there want to know what I think, and you're here, so I'll assume that you do, I never expected this fight to get made, in spite of Dillian Whyte being both a network and promotional free agent. I anticipated that there would be problems, because Frank Warren ain't got the budget that Eddie Hearn has, and neither does Bob Arum.
Dillian Whyte's not going to fight in a fight like this on the cheap.
But Frank and Bob, they're not going to want Eddie to do the fight. Of course not. They're not going to want to see their prized stallion at heavyweight become content for their competitor. They don't want Tyson Fury to cross over to the DAZN side of things. Of course not. How Tyson Fury feels about that himself? Well, he's letting these guys do all the talking.
So what's that tell you?
These comments from Frank Warren reveal that if there even is to be a purse bid for this fight, it won't come around, might not, until spring or summer of next year. Thus, things coming to a head in a purse bid situation.
We're not there yet.
And we're not going to be for a while. It's simple, really. Tyson Fury's never at a loss for words. And out of his own mouth, he said that after Deontay Wilder, he would move to fight Dillian Whyte next. Dillian Whyte, who's been waiting for a shot at the green belt for as long as I can remember. And lo and behold, that's not what's happening. That's not what's going on.
And his next fight ain't gonna even be for the WBC title.
Tyson Fury's always forgiving followers, his band of spin doctors. As you can imagine, they're very forgiving of Tyson Fury and this situation, when the truth is,
some of them are saying he shouldn't fight Whyte at all and drop the belt.
You know, I spoke to one guy, and he tried to convince me that an Andy Ruiz fight is a bigger fight. Andy Ruiz, who put up some very piss-poor pay-per-view numbers here in America in his last outing. Is Andy Ruiz a bigger name in the United Kingdom than Dillian Whyte? Because Tyson Fury's ring return is set to go down in the United Kingdom, not the United States.
And not that people are climbing over each other here to see an Andy Ruiz fight.
I mean, fun and fuckery aside, Tyson Fury's core supporters are going to justify whatever he does, no matter how big a contradiction it is to what he said before. They allow him to go back on his word time and time again, and this is just another instance, another example. It was Tyson Fury himself who said that after Wilder, he'd fight Dillian Whyte. And is that what's going on?
They're quick to bring up fights that Dillian Whyte pulled out of.
Like the Pulev fight, as if Tyson Fury never pulled out of a fight a day in his life, right?
Right.
Hoping that the boxing community at large doesn't already know that Tyson Fury pulled out on Kubrat Pulev years before Dillian Whyte versus Pulev even became a talking point, before that became a conversation. In fact, Tyson Fury has pulled out of far more fights than Dillian Whyte has by a country mile. He pulled out on Pulev, he pulled out on
Ustinov too.
Never got around to fighting David Price, his domestic rival David Price, in his prime, before Tony Thompson stretched him out like a pair of Sunday slacks. Tyson Fury never fought that guy either.
Quite famously pulled out on Vladimir Klitschko with his mental health bullshit.
Well, first he hurt his ankle. He suffered some kind of an ankle injury, and an ankle injury became a brain injury, or mental health injury, whatever it was. He rejected the idea of fighting Dillian Whyte in a WBC final eliminator in May of 2019. Later on that year, he hinted that he would drop the WBC title before he fights Dillian Whyte. His fans don't like guys like me and you pointing that out. His fans love bringing up 1 or 2 fights that Dillian Whyte might have pulled out of, but as soon as you start talking about all the fights that Tyson Fury pulled out of, which is really besides the point, because this ain't about those fights. It's about this one, the one between Dillian Whyte and Tyson Fury. These guys will try real hard to get away from the subject at hand, saying things like Dillian Whyte doesn't bring something to the table, as opposed to Tom Schwartz and all the things that he brought to the table, right? Right. A few days ago, Bob Arum said that they're looking at Joseph Parker, they're looking at Andy Ruiz, and those are decent names they are, though they don't bring the marquee value in the United Kingdom, where Tyson Fury's supposed to be fighting. Neither Andy Ruiz or Joseph Parker are bigger names in the UK than Dillian Whyte. So spare me what does he bring to the table crap. What did Tom Schwartz bring to the table? What did Otto Wallin bring to the table? Nothing. In the United Kingdom, what do either Andy Ruiz or Joseph Parker bring to the table that Dillian Whyte does not? If Tyson Fury's next fight is in fact going down in the United Kingdom, Dillian Whyte has more marquee value in the UK than either of those guys. So spare me what does he bring to the table crap. I knew this was going to happen. And I knew that Tyson Fury's fans would immediately rush to his defense, as they always do, trying to explain away the inconsistencies in his resume, the inconsistencies in his career, the double standards. How are you mad that Dillian Whyte pulled out on Pulev when Tyson Fury did that before Dillian? What is it about Tyson fighting Dillian Whyte that bothers you guys so much? What are you afraid of? But they're so averse to it, they're actually recommending, at least some of them, that Tyson Fury drop the WBC title altogether and not give Dillian the time of day. It's a duck. I don't care what Tyson Fury did to Deontay Wilder 1 or 2 or 3 times or however many it was. That has absolutely nothing to do with Dillian Whyte. This is an according to Hoyle duck. For the consistently inconsistent Tyson Fury. The hang-up that many of Tyson Fury's critics have with him, myself among them, is that he is consistently inconsistent, a rabid contradictorian. You know, Tyson Fury's fans, they think he hails the moon and stars. They think he's the best thing going, the best thing on 2 legs. That's what they'll tell you. They'll point out all these different fights that Dillian Whyte pulled out of, but they won't talk about all the fights Tyson Fury pulled out of. How, in many ways, he's an opportunist. It was very opportune of Tyson Fury to suffer that ankle injury ahead of what was supposed to be a Vladimir Klitschko rematch, a rematch that he was bound to, as Vladimir had exercised his rematch clause. It was very opportune, the timing of that injury to Tyson Fury's ankle, just like it was very opportune for Tyson to pull out of that rematch altogether due to his mental health bullshit. Goes away for 2 years, comes back, fights a couple of handpicks. Fights Deontay Wilder for the first time. Fights a couple of handpicks. A couple more, I should say. Neither of them as highly ranked as Dillian Whyte, as proven at the weight as Dillian Whyte. None of those guys were divisional top 10 fighters the way that Dillian Whyte was, the way he still is here today. His fans let him get away with this, but to the rest of the world, they see it, they notice it. Fights Wilder again. Then fights him again. And this is supposed to be Tyson Fury's claim to fame. His claim as this division's #1 ranked heavyweight, being entangled with Deontay Wilder since 2018. Being inside of that bubble for 3 years. Never mind the rest of the division, right? Never mind all of those guys. All he's got to do is fight the same guy 3 times, and that makes him #1. Well, was Wilder #1? No, he wasn't. Deontay Wilder's entire professional career and his entire reign as a champion, he never unified anything. He was never the lineal champion of this division or Ring Magazine champion of this division. Yet all Tyson Fury has to do to be this division's #1 fighter is fight that guy 3 times over the course of 3 years, couple of handpicks in between. Why don't you get the fuck out of here? Tyson Fury himself, he likens himself to a Spartan. He classified Anthony Joshua as a business guy, a businessman, whereas he himself, he's a fighting man. He's a Spartan. He don't care about money, yet what's the holdup with this fight? Money. Why don't he do with this fight? Why don't he do with Dillian Whyte what he said he did with his earnings from the first Wilder fight? Why don't he just give Dillian what he wants? Because he don't care about money, he's a Spartan. He said he gave the earnings from the first Wilder fight to charity. What charity? Nobody knows because he didn't say. That's if you actually believe he gave his earnings, all of his earnings, to some undisclosed charity. Better still, Tyson Fury would have you believe that money is not a holdup, and money is not an object to him. It's not important. Yet what's holding up this fight is in reference to the money. The split.
The guy's full of shit. I've been saying it for years.
Yeah, he can box a bit, and that's nice. And I don't buy into any of that Glovegate crap that Wilder tried to levy against him.
Oh, Wilder's just a delusional sore fucking loser. That's what that was.
What this is Tyson Fury being consistently inconsistent. He's the one that led all of us to believe that Dillian Whyte would be the next guy that he fights. He's the one that said that money isn't an object to him. It's not an issue, that he's a Spartan. He's a fighting man. Yet what's holding up this fight is money. Tyson Fury is consistently inconsistent, and his core supporters, his fans, want me and you to overlook all of this. But
If you want the Whyte fight, do what you need to do. You put your foot down, you sit down with those people, you agree to something.
if you want the fight, if you want it, key word, if you want the fight, you do what you need to do. You sit down with Dillian, his people, your people, you iron something out, you make it happen.
And I don't think he's fighting Joseph or Andy next.
Well, Bob Arum might have name-dropped those guys, but Andy Ruiz's next fight is supposed to be in Mexico City. Joseph Parker, that's his buddy.
I don't think they're gonna fight.
Being trained by Tyson Fury's cousin, former WBO middleweight champion Andy Lee. Do you get the sense that Andy Lee's gonna do corner work for Joseph Parker to beat his cousin?
Never thought this fight was gonna happen.
I want to make that clear. This situation, like the Errol Spence Jr. versus Terrence Crawford situation, is all about record keeping, archiving the information to assign blame where blame belongs. And the blame for this must be laid at the feet of the plastic Spartan, Tyson Fury.
He just wants to keep fighting handpicks.
He's waiting for the winner of Joshua versus Usyk 2 to emerge so that he can be fast-tracked into that fight. That's what this is all about, and that's why he don't really want to take a chance on Dillian Whyte. Say what you want to say about Dillian Whyte, but whenever it's time for someone to fight him, there's always a problem. It was a problem for Wilder, and now it's a problem for Tyson Fury.
He wants to be on easy street while he waits for the winner of that fight.
But Anthony Joshua didn't get to stroll down easy street waiting for the winner of Wilder versus Fury 3. He had to take on Alexander Usyk in a fight that I told you guys he could lose.
He didn't get to stroll down easy street, so why should Tyson Fury?
All this to get out of fighting a guy that Anthony Joshua knocked out years ago.
And Alexander Povetkin.